Okay, picture this. You are Rome. You are the empire. You've been stomping faces across the Mediterranean for centuries. You've got the best army in the known world. You've got the best generals. You've got the swagger. You've got the drip, metaphorically speaking, because it is 216 BC and nobody's invented drip yet. And then one Tuesday afternoon, a Carthaginian dude named Hannibal Barca shows up. And he doesn't just beat you. He doesn't just hand you an L. He takes your entire army, we're talking like 80,000 soldiers, and he just deletes them. Like gone server error, account terminated, army not found. That is the Battle of Cannae. And honestly, it might be the single most embarrassing military catastrophe in all of human history. But here is the crazy part. And this is why we're talking about Rome today instead of Carthage. Rome didn't quit. And what they did next is basically a masterclass in how to take the most humiliating loss imaginable, keep your head on straight, and eventually flip the entire script. So buckle up, because this story has it all. Military genius, political betrayal, war elephants, forbidden juice, and a guy who died because he wouldn't stop drawing circles in the dirt. Stay with me. It is going to be a ride before we get into the carnage. We need to talk about Hannibal Barca for a second, because this dude is not your average villain. This is a once in a generation certified hall of fame military genius who just happened to have a personal vendetta against Rome the size of the Mediterranean Sea. Here is the backstory: Rome and Carthage. Carthage, being this powerful North African city, state based in what is now Tunisia, had already fought one massive war, the First Punic War. Rome won. They took Sicily from Carthage and then added insult to injury by demanding a huge pile of money as a penalty payment. Carthage was humiliated, and Hannibal's dad, Hamilcar Barca, was absolutely seething about it. According to the ancient historians, when little Hannibal was like 9 years old and begging his dad to take him on a military campaign, Hamilcar made him swear an oath right there at the altar that he would be Rome's eternal enemy, 9 years old. This man grew up with destroy Rome as his entire personality. His whole childhood was basically one long revenge arc loading screen. By the time Hannibal was an adult, he was in charge of Carthage's forces in Spain, and he decided it was time to collect on that childhood promise. But here is what makes Hannibal genuinely legendary. He didn't take the easy route. He didn't sail across the Mediterranean. He didn't wait for Rome to come to him. He decided to march his army, including famously a bunch of war elephants, over the Alps in winter with elephants. People told him this was insane. He did it anyway. He lost a huge portion of his army to the cold, to the mountain passes, to the snow, to everything that says, this is a terrible idea. But the ones who made it through, those guys were so hardened, so battle-tested, that they were basically a walking army of final bosses. Rome did not see this coming. Nobody saw this coming, because it was objectively unhinged. So Hannibal marches into Italy, and Rome is like, okay, we've got this. We'll send our armies. We'll crush him in the field. Classic Roman military doctrine. Meet your enemy. Push forward. Overwhelm them. Except Hannibal had already figured out exactly how Romans fight, and he had a plan. Cannae was a small town in southeastern Italy. That is where it happened. The 2nd of August 216 BC, a date that Roman senators would have nightmares about for generations. Hannibal's total force was actually smaller than Rome's. Rome had somewhere around 80,000 soldiers. Hannibal had maybe 50,000. By every conventional measure, Rome should have won. But Hannibal did something that no one had ever seen before at that scale. He let Rome push forward into the center of his line on purpose. He deliberately weakened his center, let the Romans smash into it, let them feel like they were winning, and then his wings, his cavalry, wrapped around the Roman flanks like two arms closing in on a hug, except the hug was made of swords. The Romans were completely surrounded, encircled, trapped. And because they were so packed in together, most of them couldn't even lift their arms to fight. They were just standing there shoulder to shoulder as Hannibal's forces cut through them from every direction. An estimated 50,000 to 70,000 Romans died that day in a single afternoon. The generals running Rome's army. Dead a consul, one of the two highest leaders of Rome. Dead Hannibal's forces collected the gold rings from the Roman dead and reportedly sent baskets of them back to Carthage. That is how many knights and senators were killed. Enough rings to fill a basket. When the news hit Rome, people lost their minds. And honestly, fair now, this is where it gets both absolutely terrifying and kind of darkly hilarious depending on your perspective. Rome is in full, on catastrophic meltdown. People are fleeing the city. Rumors are flying. Some senators are literally saying they should abandon Italy entirely. The social fabric is unraveling. There is screaming in the streets, and the Roman Senate, in its infinite wisdom, decides the best response is to bury some people alive. I am not joking, see. Rome had this tradition of consulting the Sibylline books, basically a collection of ancient prophecies, whenever things got really bad. And the books told them that in a time of great crisis, they needed to perform a ritual that involved burying a Gallic man and woman and a Greek man and woman alive in the Forumborium as a sacrifice. The idea was that the gods were angry, the gods were ignoring Rome, and if Rome really went all in on the ritual, the gods might pick up the phone again. Did it work? Well, Rome did eventually win. So maybe. Or maybe they just made some really good strategic decisions after the ritual and gave the gods the credit. We'll probably never know. The point is, Rome was in full supernatural crisis mode. They thought the universe itself had turned against them. But, and this is crucial, while the panic was happening, while people were screaming and sacrificing and doing everything desperate people do in desperate times, the Senate also did something really important. They kept going. They didn't surrender. They didn't send someone to beg Hannibal for mercy. When Hannibal actually sent an envoy to Rome to negotiate a peace deal, let's call him Jim Bob, because his actual name is less fun, Rome's response was basically, "No thanks, Jim Bob, don't let the city gates hit you on the way out." They refused to even discuss surrender terms. They kept recruiting, they kept organizing, they dug in. That stubbornness, that absolute, almost irrational refusal to quit is one of the most remarkable things about Rome. It is also probably why they eventually won. Now, at this point in the story, Rome makes a decision that, in the short term, makes them look kind of cowardly, but in the long term turns out to be genius. They appointed a dictator, which in Rome was actually a legitimate emergency position, not an insult, named Quintus Fabius Maximus. And Fabius had a plan. The plan was, don't fight Hannibal. That is it. That is the whole plan. See, Fabius understood something that the guys who got destroyed at Cannae didn't. Hannibal was an absolute wizard in a pitched battle. If you met him on an open field with both armies lined up and ready to go, he was going to win. His tactics were too good. His cavalry was too good. His instincts were too good. So Fabius decided the answer was to simply not do that. He harassed Hannibal's supply lines. He cut off foraging parties. He attacked small detachments. He positioned his forces on hills and in terrain that negated Hannibal's advantages. But whenever Hannibal came out looking for a big fight, Fabius just disappeared into the hills. Romans at the time absolutely hated this. They mocked Fabius mercilessly. They called him cunctator, the delayer. It was meant as an insult because Romans, culturally, believed that real men fought. Ghosting Hannibal felt like cowardice. Meanwhile, Hannibal was marching through Italy basically on a tour, burning and looting everything in sight, trying to get Rome's Italian allies to defect. He was like, "Hey, Rome abandoned you. Come join us." And some did. Some of Rome's allies flipped sides, which was a real problem, but a lot of them didn't, and Hannibal couldn't siege Rome itself. He didn't have the equipment for it. So there he was, this brilliant general stuck wandering around Italy like a shark that can't quite get to the fish. Fabius's strategy, later historians would call it the Fabian strategy, was essentially, if we don't fight him directly, we can't lose directly, and the longer this goes on, the more our strengths matter and his weaknesses show. Eventually, the Romans got impatient with Fabius and decided to try fighting Hannibal in the field again. They got crushed again, not as catastrophically as Cannae, but bad enough to be embarrassing. And then finally, they came back to the Fabian approach and committed to it properly. Here is a fun detail people often forget about this period. While Hannibal was wandering around Italy being mostly unstoppable, Rome was also fighting other wars simultaneously. Because Rome never stops. They were fighting in Spain. They were fighting in Sicily. They were fighting in Macedonia because King Philip V of Macedon decided to make an alliance with Hannibal, and Rome responded by opening a second front against Macedonia. This is the kind of energy we're talking about. Your country just got its military vaporized, your allies are defecting, there is a terrifying genius marching through your homeland, and your Senate's response is, okay, but also let's invade Macedonia. The Sicily campaign is actually where one of the more famous side stories of this era takes place. In 214 BC, Rome laid siege to Syracuse, a powerful Greek city on Sicily. Syracuse had decided to switch sides and support Carthage. Big mistake. Here is the thing about Syracuse, though. It was home to Archimedes. Yes, that Archimedes, the math guy, the Eureka guy, the give me a lever long enough and I'll move the earth guy. Archimedes had basically turned Syracuse into a death trap using his own inventions. He built enormous cranes that could reach over the city walls and pick up Roman ships, actual ships, and shake the soldiers out of them into the water. He built giant burning mirrors, or so the legend goes, that set Roman ships on fire by focusing sunlight. He engineered all kinds of projectile machines that made attacking the city walls feel like walking into a blender. The Roman commander Marcellus reportedly said something like, "Can we stop fighting this geometric Briareus?" Because every time they came up with a plan, Archimedes had already invented a machine to counter it. Eventually, though, Rome got in through a distracted night during a festival, and the story goes that a Roman soldier found Archimedes just sitting on the ground drawing geometric figures in the sand, working on a math problem. completely unbothered by the fact that the city was actively being sacked around him. The soldier told him to come along. Archimedes reportedly said something along the lines of, "Don't disturb my circles." The soldier killed him. Marcellus was apparently furious when he heard. He'd wanted Archimedes alive. The man was a walking superweapon factory, but it was too late. Archimedes had been too committed to his geometry to care about self-preservation. Honestly, respect, okay. We've been in the dark long enough. It is time to introduce our protagonist. Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus. And yes, he absolutely earned that nickname. Here is what makes Scipio remarkable. He grew up watching Hannibal destroy everything Rome held dear, and instead of being broken by it, he turned it into a research project. He was at the Battle of the Trebia, one of Hannibal's early victories in Italy. He may have been at Cannae. He watched, close up, as Hannibal ran circles around Roman generals who were more experienced and more seasoned than him, and he paid attention. He noticed things. He studied Hannibal's tactics. He asked questions like, how did Hannibal do this? What made that flanking maneuver work? How did he use his cavalry differently? What would happen if I tried to counter that? When Scipio eventually got political and military power through a combination of genuine talent, family connections, and the fact that Rome had run out of good candidates because so many commanders had died, he started applying everything he'd learned. He went to Spain first. Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal was there with a significant Carthaginian force. Everyone expected Scipio to do the classic Roman thing, careful, methodical, siege-based warfare. Scipio did something insane instead. He marched directly to Cartagena, Carthage's main base in Spain, and took it in a surprise assault. The city had a lagoon that was considered a natural defense. Scipio found out from local fishermen that the lagoon became shallow enough to wade through during low tide. He timed his attack perfectly. The Carthaginians couldn't figure out how he got through after. Cartagena, Scipio kept winning in Spain, systematically eliminating Carthaginian power there. He was using Hannibal's own tricks against Hannibal's people. But the really audacious part, Scipio didn't want to keep playing defense in Italy. He had a completely different idea. He wanted to invade Africa. He wanted to take the war to Carthage's doorstep. The Senate thought he was crazy. Hannibal is literally in Italy right now. You want to go to Africa? Scipio's logic was cold and beautiful. If we threaten Carthage directly, Hannibal will have to come home to defend it. We stop fighting him on his terms, on ground he chose, and force him to fight us on our terms. It took a while, but he eventually got the approval. And in 204 BC, Scipio landed in North Africa. Scipio's Africa campaign went well from the start. He won battles. He formed alliances with Numidian cavalry, the same kind of cavalry that had been absolutely wrecking Roman armies for years. He burned Carthaginian camps. He made life very uncomfortable for Carthage. And just as he predicted, Hannibal was recalled from Italy. Think about what this means for a second. Hannibal had been in Italy for 15 years. 15 years of campaigning, winning battle after battle, surviving fighting. He never lost a major engagement in Italy. He left undefeated in the field. But he was being called home because of a 30-something-year-old Roman who'd learned everything from watching Hannibal himself. In 202 BC, the two sides met at the Battle of Zama near Carthage. Now Hannibal brought war elephants, 80 of them, because of course he did. War elephants were partly a tactical weapon. They could smash through infantry formations, and partly psychological warfare. Imagine being a Roman soldier who has been training for battle your whole life, and suddenly there are 80 elephants running at you. That is not in any training manual. Scipio had clearly anticipated this. He trained his troops to respond to trumpets, specific signals by opening lanes in the formation. So when the elephants charged, instead of a solid wall of panicking humans, Scipio's army just parted like a zipper. The elephants ran through the gaps without hitting anyone, some of them getting redirected toward the Carthaginian flanks instead. Hannibal watched his elephant charge get completely neutered by a Roman general who'd literally planned for it. The battle was brutal and close. Hannibal's troops were arranged in 3 lines, each designed to wear down the Romans progressively. For a long time it was genuinely even. This was the best Hannibal had assembled, and Scipio had his best. The decisive moment came with the cavalry. Scipio had better cavalry, including his Numidian allies, and they routed Hannibal's horsemen, chased them off the field, then swung back around and hit Hannibal's infantry from behind. Sound familiar? It should. It is basically what Hannibal did to Rome at Cannae. Scipio defeated Hannibal by learning from Hannibal. Carthage was finished as a major power. They surrendered. The war was over. Now you'd think that after all this, after saving Rome, after defeating the greatest general of the ancient world, after literally ending the Second Punic War, Scipio would get a hero's retirement and a nice villa and everyone would be cool. You'd be wrong. This is Rome. Scipio did get the honorific Africanus added to his name, which was a big deal. He was celebrated. He was popular. He was arguably the most famous Roman of his generation. But politics is politics. Scipio had enemies in the Senate. There was always someone threatened by his fame, his popularity, his somewhat un-Roman approach to war. He was known for treating defeated enemies with some dignity, which made conservatives suspicious. He had an old enemy named Cato, we'll get to Cato in a second, who basically made it his life mission to tear Scipio down. Eventually, Scipio got dragged into legal and political battles. Some of his family members were accused of taking bribes from Antiochus III. That is a whole other war. The accusations may have been politically motivated. Scipio was furious and humiliated. He retired from Rome, left the city, spent his last years at his estate in Laternum, apparently refusing to return to Rome even when asked. He reportedly asked to be buried there rather than in Rome, a pointed message to the city he'd saved. He died around 183 BC, the same year as Hannibal, which is a wild historical coincidence. Hannibal, meanwhile, after Zama, had actually tried to do something constructive. He became a statesman and tried to reform Carthage's finances and government, but Rome kept pressuring Carthage to hand him over because they never stopped being afraid of him even in defeat. Hannibal spent his last years in exile, jumping from court to court around the eastern Mediterranean, always just ahead of Roman pursuit. He ended up in the court of a king named Prusias in Bithynia, when Rome finally came for him there too, and it became clear there was no escape. Hannibal reportedly said something along the lines of, "Let us relieve the Romans of their long-standing anxiety, since they find it too much to wait for the death of an old man." Then he drank poison he'd been keeping in a ring on his finger, the forbidden juice. He was about 64 years old. He died never conquered, but never triumphant either. And then there is Cato, Marcus Porcius Cato, Cato the Elder, also known, behind closed doors, as that guy. Cato was a conservative Roman senator who had fought in the Second Punic War and spent the rest of his extremely long life being intensely aggressively, almost pathologically Roman. He was suspicious of anything Greek. He was suspicious of anything new. He thought Roman virtue was declining and he wanted everyone to know it all the time, but his most famous quirk, the thing he is remembered for, is Carthage even after Zama. Even after Carthage was stripped of its navy, forced to pay tribute, reduced to a minor power. Even when Carthage was no longer a threat by any serious analysis, Cato could not let it go. He reportedly ended every single speech he gave in the Senate on any topic about anything with the phrase, "Carthago delenda est." Carthage must be destroyed. Didn't matter if the speech was about grain prices. Didn't matter if it was about building a road. Didn't matter if it was about some procedural vote nobody cared about. And furthermore, Carthage must be destroyed. Every single time. Eventually, decades after the Second Punic War, in 949 BC, when Cato was very old, but still absolutely unhinged about this, Rome found a pretext to go to war with Carthage. Again, the Third Punic War. It ended in 946 BC with the complete destruction of Carthage. The city was burned, the population was killed or enslaved. And yes, according to a legend that historians debate, the ground was salted so nothing would grow there again. Cato didn't quite live to see it. He died in 149 BC, right as the war was beginning. But still, he basically willed it into existence through sheer rhetorical stubbornness. Carthago delenda est. My dudes, he got his wish okay. So, what do we actually take from all this? Because beyond the cool battles and the war elephants and the forbidden juice and the man who died protecting his geometry homework, there are some genuinely interesting ideas here about failure, resilience, and adaptation. Rome lost at Cannae in a way that by any rational calculation should have ended them. The scale of the loss was staggering. Their confidence, their military doctrine, their sense of invincibility, all of it got shattered in a single afternoon. And the reason Rome survived, and ultimately won, wasn't because they suddenly got lucky, or because Hannibal made some catastrophic mistake, or because the gods actually picked up the phone after all those rituals. It is because Rome adapted. Fabius understood that the old playbook didn't work and threw it out. He took the heat for it politically. He got mocked and called a coward. He did it anyway because the alternative was another Cannae. Scipio took it further. He didn't just throw out the old playbook, he read Hannibal's playbook and used it against him. He studied the enemy so thoroughly that at Zama, he was essentially beating Hannibal with Hannibal's own moves. That is a rare quality. Most people, when they fail, especially when they fail catastrophically, either pretend it didn't happen or they get so traumatized they can't function. Scipio did neither. He took the failure as data. There is also something to be said about Rome's institutional stubbornness. When Hannibal sent that envoy to negotiate after Cannae, a lot of people in Rome wanted to listen. It would have been rational. Arguably, you just lost 70,000 men. Maybe hear the guy out. But the Senate said no, not because they had a great plan yet. They didn't, just because they refused to accept that the story was over. That combination, flexibility in tactics, stubbornness in purpose, is what carried Rome through one of the worst military disasters in history to eventual victory. Whether that is inspiring or terrifying probably depends on what Rome ends up doing with that victory, and given the next few centuries of Roman history, well, that is a story for another video. So Battle of Cannae, Rome's worst day. 70,000 dead, a consul killed, and a basket of gold rings sent back to Carthage as a receipt. Rome's response: bury some people alive, refuse to negotiate, appoint a guy whose entire strategy was just don't fight him, and eventually produce Scipio Africanus, the one dude who took notes instead of crying. Hannibal never lost a battle in Italy, spent 15 years marching around the peninsula, got recalled home, lost at Zama, spent his retirement running from Rome, drank ring poison at 64. Scipio saved Rome, defeated the greatest general alive, got politically bullied out of his own city, died asking to be buried somewhere other than Rome. A little dark Cato made destroy Carthage his entire personality and technically won Archimedes, died because he wouldn't stop doing math during a military invasion. Look, history is messy. The heroes don't always get happy endings. The bad guys sometimes have genuinely impressive skills, and sometimes the only thing that separates winners from losers is the willingness to adapt and the stubbornness to keep going when every rational signal says quit. If you want more of this kind of chaos, more ancient wars, more improbable comebacks, more people dying because of their commitment to geometry, hit the subscribe button. We've got a long road to 100K, and we're going to need every Scipio we can get. Leave a comment if you were Rome after Cannae. What do you do? Do you take the peace deal from Hannibal's envoy? Do you pull a Fabius and go full ghost mode? Or do you go full lunatic and invade Africa? Let me know. The comment section is the Senate. Try not to destroy it. See you in the next one.